Good morning. I hope that your Wednesday is off to a good start. Mine is so far. I'm again in my outdoor office with a good second cup of coffee. Of course, my USS North Carolina battleship mug. Today I'm just going to be continuing along what I had started a few weeks ago, which is to begin looking some at the second coming, the end times, as people might want to put it. And I guess, last week I took a break away from that to address the issue of women in the ministry that got so thorny at the Southern Baptist Convention a couple of weeks ago. But prior to that, I had first just introduced the whole topic of Christ's return, that it's an article of faith that he is coming again to judge the living and the dead, to usher in the new creation. And then after that, I got to the topic of the rapture, which is a concept that I personally don't believe in. And then today, I'm just going to jump right off into the Marianas Trench, the Challenger Deep, because this is going to get really deep in a hurry. And this is the whole topic of the millennium. And if you're going to be talking about how people look at the end of time, different views of it, it tends to revolve around this topic of the millennium, the 1,000-year reign, that you find in Revelation 20. I'm going to read a little bit of Revelation 20, and I want to point out to you the best Bible in the world, or the best kind of Bible. This. It is not the translation. The best kind of Bible is one that's totally fallen apart because it's been used so much. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. That is, don't have time to read all of the chapter, but that introduces us to this topic of the 1,000 years, the millennium, that we do find in Revelation. The idea of the rapture is not in Revelation. Even if you believe in the concept, that is not something in Revelation. But the millennium, very much is. And speaking of Revelation, over the last year or so, I've been working on a commentary study, if you will, on Revelation that hopefully I'll have that finished in another month or so. Okay, so what do we do with this idea of a millennium, a 1,000-year reign of Christ? There are really three main ways to look at it: pre-millennialism, post-millennialism, or amillennialism. Pre, meaning Christ will return before the millennium. Post, Christ will return after the millennium, or amillennialism. There isn't a literal 1,000-year reign. And then I heard one preacher one time, tongue-in-cheek, say that there's also panmillennialism, meaning it'll all pan out in the end. But for today, I'm going to look at premillennialism. What does this mean? As the name implies, Jesus is going to return, and that Jesus will return, and that will usher in a 1,000-year reign, and he'll reign on earth with the saints for a literal 1,000 years, reigning from Jerusalem. Upon his return, Satan is bound for 1,000 years, and then at the end of that 1,000 years, he's going to be released and lead a great rebellion The end of chapter 20 talks about gathering people from Gog and Magog from the four corners of the earth, and they're going to wage war against the saints, against their holy camp, and ultimately fire is going to come down from heaven and destroy them all. The premillennialist, like I said, tends to take this pretty literally. It is a literal 1,000 years, and that as the name implies, like I said, Christ returns before the millennium. Okay, so let's assess this just a little bit. If you listen to preachers on the radio or TV, almost certainly they will be coming from this viewpoint. They will, like 95% of the time, be premillennialist. If you see a preacher on TV with elaborate charts and graphs on the wall, that almost certainly premillennialist. And amongst premillennialism, there are really two different, to get even deeper still, there are two different ways of looking at it. In the historic church, like in the first couple of hundred years of the church, there were some early church fathers that held to a form of premillennialism. Life goes on, it probably gets a little worse at the end. Christ returns, literal 1,000-year reign, and then judgment. But beginning about a couple of hundred years ago, with the advent of this notion of a rapture, we have sort of a modern take on premillennialism. You have life goes on, it starts getting pretty bad, and then as life is starting to get pretty bad, believers are raptured up. You have 7 years of awful tribulation on the earth, and then you have, at the end of the 7 years, Jesus returns, literal 1,000 years, and then after that, judgment, resurrection, etc. Premillennialism is, of the views of the millennium, it is probably the most pessimistic. It is the most pessimistic in terms of how you view history. Premillennialism looks at the world. Part of the whole concept is that the world is going south. The world is going south. It's a pretty pessimistic outlook on things. For the premillennialists, the kingdom of God is primarily a future concept rather than both future and present. And also, in a sense, premillennialism is the most straightforward reading of the text. It says Jesus returns. That happens in chapter 19. Satan is bound 1,000 years. After the 1,000 years, you have resurrection, judgment, and then the new heavens and the earth in 21, and off to the eternal state. And that seems to be the straightforward reading of what is taking place. Now I want to critique it. I am personally not a premillennialist. I used to be, but I'm not anymore. So let's take a look at this. And as I'm critiquing this, we need to remember that this is definitely something where we show each other some grace. If you happen to disagree with my take on it, that is fine. I'm going to give you my take and why I believe what I believe, but if you disagree with me, I mean no disrespect. We've got to show each other some grace here, because there are almost as many different views of the end of time as there are Christians who believe in an end of time. Okay, so 1,000 years, a literal 1,000 years. If that 1,000 years is literal, that's going to be pretty much the only time in the Bible where the word 1,000 the term thousand really is literal. in the Psalms, I cannot remember the psalm number, it's the Psalm of Moses. We have the reference to the with the Lord, 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is as 1,000 years. And then Peter quotes that in his letters. So both in the Psalms and in Peter, 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is as 1,000 years. So in that case, clearly, that 1,000 years is not literal. Other times that we run into 1,000, in Exodus 20, in the same chapter where the Ten Commandments are given, we're told that God will be merciful to the 1,000th generation. He will show mercy to 1,000 generations. Does that really mean that the 1,001st generation is in trouble? David refers to the cattle in 1,000 hills belonging to God in one of the Psalms. Does that mean that the cow on the 1,001st hill does not belong to God? No, of course not. This 1,000 years, if you're going to take this 1,000 in any way similar to the way we read the rest of the Bible, it's not a literal 1,000 years. We can look at this 1,000 years in a number of different ways, but it is certainly, in my opinion, not to be taken literally. The next thing, and this is the thing which really drew me personally away from premillennialism, at the end of the millennium, Satan is released, and there's this great rebellion. There's a great rebellion, and the devil brings people from the four corners of the earth and from Gog and Magog, and they wage war against the camp of the saints. Where did all those people come from? Where did they come from? If you are following the timeline, particularly the rapture premillennialism timeline, the only people that are on the earth are the saints. If the saints, the only people around, these saints, where does Satan gather up all these wicked people? Where do the evil people come from that Satan brings to wage war against the camp of the saints? Also consider this. This would be, the end of chapter 20 would be the third time that we have a great gathering of evil forces to wage war against the Lamb or against the saints. It happens in chapter 16, it happens in chapter 19, and now it happens again in chapter 20. Which, do we really think that this happens 3 separate times? My inclination is this. How many of us who are parents or who are teachers who have worked with kids at any point, how often you tell those kids something once if you want them to learn it? You never tell a kid something just once if you want him to learn it. You tell him over and over and over again if you want him to get the concept. And I think that's what's going on in here. Now, premillennialism that's not the way I tend to look at the second coming. It's a valid way of looking at it, but I think there are serious flaws in it, and it's not personally what I believe. The one thing that I will say is this, that you have people who look at this very seriously, and they come to very different viewpoints. I heard somebody, I cannot remember who he was, he essentially ranting about this, saying that that anybody who didn't believe in a pre-tribulational rapture, pre-millennialism, didn't believe the Bible and that's not true. It is simply not true. It is a matter of how you interpret the Bible. And because it is a matter of how we interpret it, then we show each other some grace. So I am not a premillennialist. If you are, that is fine with me. But I've given you why I think what I think. And next week I will look again at one of the other two remaining views of the millennium. And hopefully at the end we'll see what I think about it. And it is no guarantee that will be a good assessment of how the end will play out. But this is a very difficult topic, and I'm just going to give you my best guess. So y'all have a great rest of your day.